Guten Morgen, everybody, and welcome to the Shakespearean Shrew. I am your Shakespearean Shrew, Karen Feiner, professor from the University of Oklahoma and lover of all things bard. This podcast is a decorum-be-damned entrance into understanding Shakespeare's stages, for there are many, and all the players on it. I am in Garmisch, Germany, talking to Joe McPherson, a renowned tale-teller and entrepreneur. He owns Zen Kimchi Experiences, and Shawn Morrisey, a heritage researcher with a focus on folklore in Seoul, South Korea. Hi, guys.
Hey, how are you?
Guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen?
Oh, yep. That was the extent of my German right there.
There we go.
I got no German
We
for you.
satisfied your German audience. Okay. Alienating everyone else.
I'm just so excited to have you here. I'm so excited that this is going to be our Halloween podcast because I think it will be a very enlightening podcast for some of our listeners who have a love for all things horror and monster. But so you run in connection to Zen Kimchi Experiences, you both help run the Dark Side of Seoul, which is a tour that goes through Seoul, Korea. You also started doing some cemetery tours, I think, is something that
Shawn does, yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a little bit about how that came about, how that got started?
Oh, wow. I point out that I did study Korean history when I was university. One of the main reasons I moved to Korea. And then when I came here, I started getting into the tour industry, mostly for food tours. But I also realized that one niche that Korea or Seoul doesn't have, that most major cities have, is a dark tour. There was no dark tour here. And at the time, there was really not much to do around Halloween. And also, a lot of people were leaving Korea very underwhelmed because it's a very kind of sterilized, I would say almost propaganda history that the Korean government and tour guides were giving them. And I was like, but Korean history is so interesting. It's so amazing. So I wanted to create something that shared why I was really into Korean culture and history. That's how it came about. And then Shawn joined us in 2017 because he was thinking of doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, and I had not heard of Joe, actually, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that a mutual friend of ours that we didn't, because Joe and I hadn't met yet, and I just mentioned it to a friend that ended up being mutual, that I wanted to do a ghost tour. And the friend said there already is one, and I know that he's looking for a guide. And so I said, okay, well, why compete? I mean, let's meet him and see if I can just join.
Yeah.
And that was it.
So
Yeah,
how
it
is
was-
that possible? With Korea being such because I feel like Korea's got a dark side, right? It's got a lot of legends and many ghosts. Last time I went on Shawn's tour, and
Right.
so I got to hear about the toilet goddess, which
Oh, the Chukshin.
gave whole new meaning to praying to the porcelain gods. By the way, I went to all of my students. I was like, next time you know that it's actually Chuksin that you are praying to, so make sure you recognize. But so, how is it possible that they didn't have that aspect in already present? Like I find that so interesting.
Do you want to take this one, Shawn?
Korea has a very vanilla view of tourism itself. I think there's two issues here. One is that they view tourism through a very limited scope. They don't fully understand trends, and they're not interested in studying trends. And the other side is that they think this kind of thing, the idea of visiting what would be categorized as dark tourism, and there's many types of dark tour, they think that a lot of that is unusual and travelers wouldn't be interested in it. And then this just goes back to the first reason, where they're not following trends. They don't understand, because post-COVID, dark tourism was one of the fastest growing types of tourism globally. And Korea was just missing out.
I was actually before I started the tour, some people in the Korean government asked me not to do it because they felt that it would make Korea look bad.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Silly
Yes.
stuff.
And then when we start getting popular, rather than support us, they try to copy us.
Yeah.
But of
It
course,
failed, but you know, that's how it works.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
they do have a couple of dark tours. Like when you visit the Sademun prison, the history museum, the prison museum in Seoul, that is a dark tour. It's they don't give all the entire scope of the history.
Yeah,
but,
Sodemun Prison, for people to know, was the main prison used when Japan colonized Korea at the first half of the 20th century.
Right. Yeah.
So
built,
a lot of people were imprisoned there and died in there.
tortured, executed. Yeah, built in 1908, before the occupation actually started. But once Korea was liberated in 45 after World War II, the Korean government, of course, took control back of their land, and then they started using the prison to do the exact same thing, but to their own people. So that type of thing is kind of limited scope. They don't really.
We're
talk
talking about South
that.
Korea here.
Yes, right. Yeah. So there are dark tours, but they try not to tend to either know or they don't want to use those terms.
Right. DMZ. The DMZ is actually a dark tour.
DMZ is linked to war tourism, which is dark tourism. Yeah. So they do exist here, but they're just not. The Korean government themselves doesn't categorize them as dark tour. So, but everyone else would, unfortunately. So, yeah. But things like ghost walks and like what Joe and I are doing, yeah, those didn't exist. Well, there was one in the late '90s, but that was also operated by an American guy, foreigner. Yeah, I think he was American. I think, and he only ran it seasonally. I think over a 2-year period, something like that. And so, I guess that was maybe the very first kind of ghost walk, but it was only around for a short while.
Wow.
And so,
So I feel like that's something that a lot of governments do, which is avoid telling the dark side of a lot of things in order to paint the pretty side of a country. What is the importance of showing the dark side in addition to the pretty side, the pretty face of any country? Because South Korea is beautiful. I loved being there. Love the public transportation. Shout out to South Korean public transportation. But I do feel like that's true for almost any countries, that they want to put the best, you want to put your best face forward and then kind of push everything else out of the story. What's the importance of the dark side of the story?
I think it gives you a more well-rounded view, and it's a way to pull people in as well. Unfortunately, people are more attracted to negative news than positive news. I think that people just don't like being sold to, and that if you make everything all positive, it just feels like you're just getting spin. And so when you have a little something with a little more depth in it, I think people appreciate it more. I mean, one of the best compliments people give us is they say they were never interested, knew nothing about Korean history. Can I buy? What books should I buy? They want to know more about it after that.
yeah, and remembrance is a big part of it. Especially if it's say war tourism or prison tourism, like the two examples we just gave. If it's given in a well-rounded way, then it's remembrance, and that's a big part of history as well. We remember these things. That's the point of history, I think, is usually, even though I'm not a historian, but that is a point of history itself. We remember it, or you become doomed to, right, and so on. So to me, it's remembrance is one way, but then there's a cultural aspect as well. So in my tour, my version of the Dark Side tour, it's the focus is on ghost lore, urban legends, and this is then cultural. So this is providing. I feel like I'm a middleman as a researcher. All my information has come through interviews that I've done with people. So, and yeah, I'm just kind of a middleman, sharing the content. I'm not telling anything. I'm sharing it, and yeah, so then that's the cultural aspect that's important to dark tourism as
Right.
well.
I should clarify that both Shawn and I, even though we both do the Dark Side of Soul tour, each one of our tours is a very different tour.
Right. Yeah. And that was that very purposely so, to give two different types, so you can do two different tours. And so, come twice.
The other character that I latched on to from Shawn's tour was the Iyagi-gun, the storyteller who goes from village to village. And so it seems like you both are in that role as storyteller. You didn't stop halfway and force us to give you more money. Maybe you should have. But
You've been reading our reviews, haven't you?
but you definitely you tell stories across different groups of people. And I was talking to somebody actually last night, and they were like, just don't tell me, you can listen to a book if you want to, but just don't tell me that listening to a book is reading a book, because they're not the same thing. And I was like, well, but you do know that we told our stories for generations, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the hearing impaired, I mean the sight impaired can't read a book.
Nope, they can only
No,
you can
no.
only listen to it. And I was like, I have issues. I have qualms with this statement.
Yeah.
But what is the difference of telling a story? Because you are very good at it, right? It's what you do about food. It's what you do when you tell the Dark Side of Soul tours. So what is the importance of verbally telling tales?
I was hoping Shawn would take that because that's your specialty.
Okay. Well. Okay. We can both take it. Go ahead.
Oh gosh. I mean, verbally telling stories. I mean, some of us are oral learners. I would say more so that in some ways, I'm imagining like if someone did one of my tours while just reading it, I don't think they would get the whole gist of it. And even though I do try to, even on the food tours, we tell stories. In fact, every one of our food tours is done is set up like a story. There's a theme to it. I actually took that as a cue from how Shaw's gonna hate when I say this. Disney parks, how they develop all of their attractions. Every one of their attractions, they say every attraction has to tell a story. Even a roller coaster has to tell a story somehow, and we felt that way with every one of our tours. So, like for example, we have a Korean chicken and beer pub crawl, and people say, well, what kind of story can you tell with that? And I said, well, we're kind of going through the past, present, and future of chicken and beer and how it's progressed in society, and getting drunk at the whole time,
Which makes the story
Which is
better.
a good part. Which is a good part of makes you tell it better and listen better. Yeah, and I think telling a story orally, and as you pointed out, that's the way we did it for much longer than we've been reading. It's either been through plays, right, like Shakespeare, and people were. You could definitely tell me if I'm wrong. People were watching Shakespeare long before they were reading Shakespeare.
should
Oh yes.
Yeah. So
right.
right.
And what did most people know the Three Bears by reading them?
Right,
Little
and
Red Riding Hood.
Right. They were told to us, and a key thing about telling a story, having a storyteller with you, is that the storyteller can create mood through tone, inflection, and body language as well, and it can make it funnier. And just to bring it to Shakespeare for a second, I always thought that I didn't really realize that I liked Shakespeare so much until I had a really good teacher in high school who taught Shakespeare really well. And she made me realize this is actually really good. So I think before, we were just told to read it. Okay, read Romeo and Juliet, and then let's discuss it. And I was like, oh, this is boring. And then later, yeah, when we were doing like Macbeth and Hamlet, yeah, the teacher started teaching Shakespeare as if she were a storyteller. And then that created all of the mood and the atmosphere
Great.
that allowed me to realize, oh, this is just like hearing a story from my pop or my nan or somebody like that. And so that's the value of storytelling. And I think that's a thing that's never going to go away. And we just see it in different ways. Folklore, folk tales, of course, are types of storytelling or a genre of storytelling in a lot of ways. But we're seeing this in different ways now. There's a lot of things that we can say that's bad about social media, but that is for a lot of people, a lot of content creators, social media is the method of storytelling that we've never had before. Instead of having your grandkids in front of you, in front of a fire in rural Ireland in the 1800s, or your mother telling you how the legend behind why rice cooks properly at a certain depth of water in a rural village in Korea in the 1950s, you have people online who are reaching millions, potentially millions of people, and they have a vaster audience. So these types of things are always ongoing. The idea of verbal, oral tradition, and especially storytelling, will never go away. Just the medium through which we do it might change. And I think it's because we always want to have that oral tradition that's just ingrained, because we are storytelling animals. And that I think that's the importance of it, because we need it.
Yeah. Because we all love to sit around a campfire and read ghost stories.
Yeah. Well, we do.
Just hand out a piece of paper. Here, just read this. Get scared. There you
your
go.
own time.
There you go.
Really great question, because, and what Joe, you just said, I love history. It's one of my favorite things, because I love seeing what, who we came from and how we got to where we are. And I think what you're bringing in is really interesting in terms of social media, because honestly, if I could cast it out of the world, I probably would. Because I don't think that a lot of people who are grown up with social media have the attention span to sit around a fire and listen to a ghost story and stay engaged for the 7 to 10 minutes to tell that story anymore.
Whipping out that phone. Whoa. I mean, Shawn and I, we have a story when you were first learning the tour. We only had one person on the tour that night. And we still do the tour if only one person books. And this person, only person on the tour, was playing on her phone while we're telling the story.
She's playing Pokemon Go. Yeah. But I think a lot of that comes down, so ultimately I agree with you, Karen, but I do think the idea of attention span depends on the content and who is sharing it. I think a really good storyteller could engage the most, I don't know, I don't want to be ageist and say the youngest people on social media, but could engage the most TikTok savvy user in the world, that you can think of and you can find. It really comes down to how the stories are being told. So I think it's still possible. It's just that there's no, you can't commodify that in a broad way, right? And I think that's why you need people to watch things for short amounts of time, because they make more money.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that came from. We can blame capitalism.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's blame capitalism.
I like it. I'm on board.
Okay.
All in accord. Okay, so you brought up Shakespeare. So glad you did.
That's all of my Shakespeare knowledge, by the way.
I was like, Shawn, the one who was like, all right, leave me out of the Shakespeare conversation. You brought him up first. Just remember that.
Yep.
But I think you have a really great point about, I talk about how he's taught a lot, because a lot of people that I interview, they talk about their first experience with Shakespeare, and they're like, freshman year, it was Romeo and Juliet or A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer was my first one. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so painful.
Boring.
And,
It was boring.
Yeah. And I think, again, you're right that it's because it's not meant to be read. Shakespeare is not meant to be read. And so when we sterilize it and we put it in a book and we're like, read this,
Right.
it takes away so much about what makes Shakespeare great.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shakespeare he's got his monsters, right? Both social monsters. We can talk about that later. But he's got the real monsters too. He's got fairies. He's got, witches.
Asses. People with asses heads.
Yes. Oh, Bottom. One of my favorites.
Shape-shifting
And he's
tales.
got ghosts, right? Hamlet. And so with these figures, I wanted to kind of touch on what it means to incorporate ghosts into a social atmosphere, right? Because Midsummer Night's Dream, that one is based on fairies who send things, awry, Puck, who puts the wrong flower juice on the wrong person, and then all of a sudden, everybody's off tripping in the woods.
Right.
But so if we're looking at the use of monsters, why do you think we do that? Why do you think we use monsters to tell otherwise human stories?
I would say metaphors for nature and humanity, for one thing. I mean, this one ways we invent our gods and other mythical creatures is to explain why nature does what nature does and why human nature does what human nature does. That sounded much deeper than I really meant it.
But I love it. And I mean, with Titania and Oberon, that's exactly what we get, right? They're
Right.
fighting.
And so fairies in Midsummer, in modern times, thanks to Peter Pan and Sleeping Beauty and a lot of Disney stuff, people think of fairies as, oh, well, I want to be a fairy. But people didn't know that back then. Sean's going to back me up on this. The fair folk were scary. You don't want them near you.
Right.
They were evil. They were mischievous. They would cause bad things. They were imps. And so in Shakespeare's time, they weren't like floating around with wings and pixie dust and everything. They were scary, evil creatures that lurk in the dark parts of the forest.
Yeah, and they weren't called fae either. I never. That's a very, very modern social media view of the fairies that kind of softens their folkloric roots. But specifically when you just asked that question, it made me think of a quote from my favorite living filmmaker, Guillermo del Toro, and he says about monsters. Monsters are the patron saints of our beautiful imperfections. Ooh. And I think that's what they can and what they often do represent when they're put in literature, because we can't also forget that they were literal beliefs as well. They were literary characters, but literal beliefs. So that's something to remember. In Shakespeare's time, definitely when he was writing about, say, I don't know, Hamlet's father as the ghost, right? So this tragic person, he was murdered. Who murdered him? Claudius?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Some of my
Yep.
memories starting to come back. So this ghost who was murdered and then comes back, very spooky. There would have been a broader portion of the population that would have seen that in a play, and it probably would have stuck with them in a very literal way, because there would have been literal beliefs, really genuine literal beliefs. A lot of people today still really believe in ghosts. There are fewer people willing to admit it, and so I think maybe with someone like Shakespeare in his time using ghosts and fairies, it was more powerful maybe at that time because the beliefs were literal, and he brought them into plays to stage So maybe he was tapping into the deeply held beliefs of the time. And I'm not sure. I would love to go into the brain of a person who saw Hamlet back in when was that written? In the
1500s, the late 1500s.
Right.
Yeah. And just like when it opens up with those two people standing guard, and a ghost just comes out of the blue. I mean, not expecting that at all. It's like, oh, we're in for this, aren't we?
Right.
Oh.
And then another thing too. Which play is it when young King Edward and his younger brother, they're killed? Is that Richard? Okay, so so the two boys, like they were actually, like a lot of the people he wrote about or wrote plays about, they were historic figures, and they died probably in the Tower of London. And to turn these actual tragic figures, these two boys, 12 and 9 or 10 years old, into ghosts in a play, that I can imagine how shocking that may have been to audiences at the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because feeding into the actual, or maybe not feeding into it, but drawing from the well of fear that would have actually existed in the population at the time. So I think the way, so my point is ultimately that the way that monsters and ghosts would have been used, say, in Shakespeare's time is probably quite different from how we'd use them today. Because the beliefs are less, like I said, less widely admitted today, but still probably not as widely spread. So, but that would be my take on why Shakespeare would have done it.
Yeah,
I think he literally wanted to frighten his audience with things they actually believed in.
Mm-hmm.
When it's also interesting because that allows us to really see the tension of belief, because there was the Catholic Protestant conflict, which had amounted to so much bloodshed during that period of time. And for ghosts, that purgatory is a very Catholic idea showing up in a very Protestant England.
Oh yeah. Very good
call.
point. Good
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Elizabethan England, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's always an interesting point when he starts talking about purgatory, because everyone's like, oh, wait, is Shakespeare Catholic? What is Shakespeare?
Yeah.
And so, like, everybody loses their mind and...
Thought we got rid of that. Yeah.
We nailed it to the door and everything.
Yeah.
I know, right? We made it very clear.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's interesting to me because with the witches, witches in Macbeth, it's like, oh yeah, he was wandering through the woods. These bearded ladies, or however you want to say, the weird sisters were there, and just randomly said, "You're gonna be, Thane of Cawdor. You're gonna be king. Congratulations," and then disappear. And he takes that information, and what he does with it changes and determines the course of the play. But if you ask people who set him on that path, they'll tell you the witches did.
There's a lot of sci-fi that's been done with that same theme. Is it destiny, or being told your destiny created that destiny?
Setting you towards it, right? Which you wouldn't have gone down that path otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, Oedipus was that way too.
Right. And so you kind of have that idea of the dangers of these tales, the dangers of knowing your destiny, the dangers of knowing the future. But I feel like the witches kind of got scapegoated on that one.
You feel that way? Okay.
I do. And I feel like that's another thing that, with the ghost in Hamlet, I feel like Shakespeare tends to play with his audience and be like, yeah, sure, we'll give you an out. We'll give you this, figure to blame for everything that's going to happen.
I mean, women do get blamed a lot in Macbeth. Yeah, a lot, yeah.
Screw
Think
your
about
courage
that.
to the sticking place. Oh, see, so Lady Macbeth told him to do it, so it's all her fault.
Yeah.
But yeah, so are monsters also an opportunity to blame something other than human nature?
Well, not according to Del Toro's quote, because they represent what he calls our beautiful imperfections. So I think Del Toro would say no. It's actually the representations that we should be blaming ourselves, right?
So that you have a physical representation to think of when you're behaving a certain way. Like a lot of us who grew up at a time when there were lots of movies and cartoons of stated good guys and bad guys, light side and dark side, Autobots and Decepticons. You knew which one. You saw those as models. They were not real, but they were models of how one should behave, and they were reflections of parts of everyone. Now these days, a lot of stuff is being developed with showing the gray side of everything and the nuance and everything, which I think is an evolution of it all. But the melodrama of black versus white, good versus evil, of all that, you saw. Well, you're acting like a Darth Vader. Oh, you're acting like Starscream right there. And so, oh yeah, you're just like Puck. You're a little satyr or centaur. You're as when you're behaving that way, you actually have a figure you could point to personify an abstract concept. Wow, did that make any sense?
It did. And I think that's
I'm not even high right now. Wow. Okay.
We are in Korea.
I'm high on kimchi.
Oh man, I got the caffeine buzz going. So everyone's got something. Talking about personifications with these monsters, do you have a favorite in terms of like a monster whose genealogy, whose the creation of that monster is really interesting to you and your realm?
Just like generally from lore, yeah, I would say for growing up myself, it would have been fairies to bring it back to the little folk, because I grew up with with Irish roots in Newfoundland, where people said the fairies came across with the Irish after the Great Hunger, and they settled in Newfoundland. They were in the bottom of the boats, and then they settled there. So the fairies are a favorite of mine, mostly because they're a big part of my culture. But other ones that probably my favorite types of monsters are shapeshifters. And I love shapeshifting tales, and there are a lot of shapeshifting tales in Korea, quite different to how they're depicted in European lore. But I'm a big lover of the werewolf, and always have.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I've known you too long, Shawn.
Yeah, that's right. So the the lore that people tend to know about werewolves today, like turning under the full moon and things like that, that's all from Hollywood. We can thank the Universal Monsters for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was all written by Kurt Siodmak when he wrote The Wolfman.
Karen, actually, just let Shawn take over the show and just talk about all this, because this is so interesting when he gets on this. I could just sit and listen to him for hours when he's talking this way.
You often do. We'll get some beer on the weekend.
Yeah, we do. We get some beer, and he's telling me all these origins of every monster we know. He's like, everything you know about this monster is wrong. This is what it really is.
Okay, not wrong, but not tradition, not lore. It's not wrong. It's just the way we know about the werewolf is different. Yeah.
Vampires don't sparkle, huh?
Oh man.
Okay. All right. That's wrong. There's always an exception. That's wrong. And so like in the first Wolfman movie, it was just the autumn moon. He changed under the autumn moon. There was no such thing as a full moon. That didn't happen until there was the sequel, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And then it was changed to the full moon. And then that just got adapted. And then it linked to the idea of the moon being linked to lunacy, and things like that. All of that got wrapped in with it as well. But it wasn't there initially. People could turn into werewolves because of deals with the devil, satanic pacts. They can turn drinking the water out of the rain water out of the footprint of a wolf was believed to cause one to become a werewolf. And all this was deeply linked to just traditions. There were also something that people don't tend to mention very much. Maybe it's not as widely known, but during the witch trials of Europe, which were heresy trials, and I think we have to be very cautious about what we call them. The witch trials were heresy trials. There were big changes in the cosmology and the ontology of the church right around the beginning of the 12th century that really shifted ideas towards what witchcraft was. And Shakespeare probably would have known all this, or he would have been. Well, he was alive during the beginning of King James's reign, and
Right.
so
And he actually wrote that specific play as like an homage to King James. So, 'cause,
is that-
King James wrote demonology. He wrote
That's right.
kind of the book on it. So the
book,
same
yep.
same king who gave us the King James Bible also wrote demonology.
That's right.
About,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
Was to distract that he was gay.
Yeah, and then they, what'd you say, Joe? I didn't hear you.
Oh, yeah. King James came with the Bible to distract that he was having an affair with another man.
Oh, is that right? Well,
there's hints of that.
Right.
Oh, there's more than hints. Yeah,
Okay.
it's but not that he was distracting, but just that is true about his sexual orientation. There's a lot of
well, and that's interesting because on the other side, he wrote demonology because he thought witches were trying to kill his wife, so tried to sink her ship, and so all these things, the demonology especially informed the witch trials of the 1600s, the 17th century, and then later all the witch finders and stuff like that. But the idea of like those heresy trials also included werewolf trials. So there were people who were put on trial for being werewolves,
I did
and
not know that.
yeah,
supposed to write a play about this. That sounds really interesting.
why didn't Shakespeare write about that?
Yeah.
These were, there was like in Germany, there was a famous case of a man called Peter Stump, and all these, several cases. They were all part of the heresy trials, which included the witch trials, but also include the lesser known and lesser talked about
Which is the
werewolf
most
trials.
ultimate porn name no one's used yet.
Peter Stump,
Yes.
werewolf Stump.
Peter Stump. Wow.
We just created.
Oh, by the way, your audience, what is the rating of your cup podcast?
It's unrated. Decorum be damned.
Okay.
So, so those are my favorites. Fairies, because I have direct cultural link to stories of them, and I have a lot of stories about them, stories that I heard directly from family members, possibly some strange, at least one strange experience myself with some friends when I was about 14 years old, and werewolves, just because the idea of the shape-shifting stories and lore is just fascinating to me. But this wasn't always just fiction, like witches. The tragedy of the witch trials and the werewolf trials is in the fact that witches and werewolves don't exist. And these people were killed for something that was linked to the shifting beliefs of the church, and then later the way James, old Jimmy boy, ruined the perspective for the entire 17th century. So, or the first half of it anyway. So, but all that. That's so some lore and history behind why fairies and werewolves are my favorites.
Good choices. Joe, any favorites?
God, he was so good about this. Here, I'm just thinking of Godzilla.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
I mean, as a kid, Godzilla, and any Universal monster. I mean, I used to love stuff like that. Wolfman, Frankenstein. Okay, people say Frankenstein's monster. Well, you just said right there, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. By then people just started calling him Frankenstein because he gave him his last name.
Well, he also, not really. He didn't really give him his last name.
I'm saying he did because
He disowned him. He threw him away.
So oh wow, so he has daddy issues. So okay, all right.
And besides, I always tell my students, I'm like, Frankenstein's way scarier than what he created anyway. So it's fine.
The doctor is the monster. Yeah,
The doctor is the monster.
The doctor is
Yeah.
the monster. Jekyll and Hyde. And I just love all that stuff. But as far as a specific monster, I don't know, just the monster under your bed.
I used to leap so far to get into my bed because I knew that if I didn't, there was something that was going to grab me.
Yeah. You don't dare look.
No,
Or put
are
a
you
hand
kidding?
down to check. No, you don't dare look.
I did.
Oh man. And that explains so much, Shawn.
Maybe it does.
Yeah, I don't have an answer as deeply as Shawn's. I just any specific monsters from my childhood. I just loved monsters in general. I loved just any way your imagination could go. I would even invent monsters and draw them all the time, and come up with my own. What do they do that is so scary? Things like that when I was a kid. So my brain was always thinking about stuff. My mind was always on Halloween all year long. Always.
I mean, it's still one of my favorites. I love Halloween. But
We would
But if we're
make
talking
haunted
about-
houses as kids in my house and just invite the neighborhood kids over. And
That
I
would be so much
design them.
fun.
It was
why
fun.
don't you do that now?
Yeah, I wish I could. We did this honestly when I was a teacher here. That was really a lot of fun. We would make these amazing haunted houses, haunted mazes for the students for Halloween. Lots of work, lots of fun. It's grown men just wanted to share what we loved about what we grew up with. I mean, I have videos of scaring the crap out of kids. It was so much fun. I used to volunteer at haunted houses in the States, too. So that was fun.
I got to be a headless horsewoman.
You did?
Nice.
Did.
Oh, wow.
That was
Oh,
really.
it's fun, isn't it, though? It's so much fun doing that.
It is.
I
And
just
the
sneaked
whole
up on
time
people, and I just look at them. I act like I'm I'm just one of the guests walking through the haunted house, and I just join their group. And they just look at me and they go, ah! Just sneaking up on them. It was so much fun.
I had such a good horse for it too because he was like almost battle proof.
You had a horse?
Yeah, you can't be the headless horsewoman without a horse.
Wow. No coconuts. A real horse.
Real horse.
Wow. Amazing.
I only got dumped once.
The horse dumped you?
And my horse was like, and,
Oh, no.
yeah, but that was.
So your horse dumped you and your horse ghosted you.
I mean, we all have our moments, okay?
Well, I'm glad you survived.
Yeah, you know,
That's why we don't use horses at haunted houses. What are you doing?
when you live in East Jesus and you have horses,
You have horses and let's go scare people and make sure the horse doesn't get spooked by people being spooked.
I mean, it went from being rainbow bright when I was little, where I'd walk around my little pony that I dyed pink. Poor pony.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, wow. Oh, I want to hear this story now. This is interesting.
But you work with.
So
what
you incorporated some type of horse into your costume since you were a kid?
or dog, like
Or a dog?
I had Toto.
I mean, that's better than me. I used a robot. I had a robot, and I dressed up my robot one year instead of me and went trick-or-treating. Didn't work, man. I had so many skeptical houses. They're like, why aren't you dressed up? I said, I'm not dressed up. My robot. It's in my wagon. My robot's dressed up. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm a nerd. I was a nerd.
Sounds lazy to me.
No, it was good. My robot was dressed up really well.
I mean, one of my sister's best costumes, she was a toilet,
Toilet.
which is a very brave thing to do because I feel like that could go horribly wrong in so many ways.
You would get a lot
Yeah.
of baby Ruths.
Yes, exactly. We talked about like the evolution of monsters, and you've mentioned that monsters have become more nuanced. I mean, if you know, I think you both do you both have kids? I know Shawn
Yes.
does.
Oh, yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
So
I tend
I'm
to.
sure you've been exposed to the monster, the Monsters Incorporated, Hotel Transylvania.
Oh, yeah.
Seen them all.
I mean, I exposed them to it. Yes, of course.
So what do you make of this shift to make monsters either fuzzy and cuddly, or to tell the monster side of the story like we have in like Maleficent?
Or Grendel.
Yes.
Well, I would disagree that it's current, though. Oh, it's current, yes, but I would disagree that it's something that's new.
I was going to say, I brought up Grendel.
Yeah.
That was, what was that made? 60s, 70s? That was Beowulf from the monster's point of view.
Right. And then I was just talking about the Wolfman. The Wolfman is from the perspective of the monster and how Larry Talbot is a victim. He doesn't want, he's just a normal guy who goes to England, comes back from the U.S. He's an actor. Comes back from the U.S. Well, in the remake, he's an actor, but he comes back from the U.S. Because his brother has died, and he gets attacked by a werewolf, played by Bela Lugosi, and then it's Lon Chaney Jr. And then he himself becomes the Wolfman, and he doesn't want to be. And then all through that series, he's just looking for a cure. So that entire story is from his perspective.
Right.
And then this is played upon later in An American Werewolf in London. Again, that's
Christ, such a great movie.
Yeah, so same thing. So David, the character David, is a victim, and well, so is his friend Jack, but Jack gets killed, and then David becomes the werewolf. And when I was a kid, that was the first horror movie I ever saw, and I was 8 years old, probably a bit too young. But looking back,
I was around that age when I saw it. Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say. I'm just saying it. Maybe I was a bit too young because I think that's what people expect you to say. I think I was completely fine to watch it. Scared the hell out of me, but it wasn't until later that I really discovered why I was scared so much. It wasn't just the special effects, but it was also the fact that David didn't want to be this monster. He had no choice. And I think The Exorcist is another perspective on that.
Which was my first horror movie when I was a
go.
kid. And
Yeah.
I was too young to see it.
the crucifixion scene, or the crucifix scene, not the crucifixion scene. But the same thing when Blady wrote that, and then when it was adapted into the film. Reagan is the monster in the movie, but it's not really her, right? And so it's a bit different from what you're asking, though, where from the monster's perspective. But she's a victim the same way that David was in American Werewolf in London, and that film is from his perspective. So I would disagree that it's something that's current or something that's modern or new.
Well, it's also okay. Now I'm thinking more deeply about it because we've for a long time we've had this of humanizing the monsters or making the monsters a little less scary, a little more tangible. It's always been a little fun for kids to see something that you thought was scary and is a little less scary. I mean, the whole Monsters Inc. was all about explaining what is the monster in your closet. And so it was just helping parents so they can get some sleep. Maleficent thing, though. Now Disney is actually it's a long-term strategy Disney's doing because they're developing a villains land at their theme parks. So they're trying to focus a lot more on the villains and try to tell things from their points of view a little more. Try to make them a little less one-dimensional. So there's that going. But you're thinking of Hotel Transylvania though. Because that's a really fun show, a fun movie. But
All three of them.
They're really fun, and I just think it's just, I think it's just making something that people thought were scary and just making no, things aren't as scary as that you think it is. And in helping children confront their fears a little more easily. Like the reason why when I was last in Bangkok, I went and visited a snake farm. And I'm deathly scared of snakes, but I made myself go do it because I wanted to face my fears. And I think that's why we are, you're saying, more cuddly monsters is to help us face our fears a little better, I think, and help parents get some sleep.
And I think I have one main answer for why this started. I think this became more and more common after the Wolfman. But also Frankenstein's monster is also a victim, right? Like we've already said, he's not actually the monster. But the idea of telling stories from the perspective of monsters really started to build up through the 60s for one specific reason. Monsters are cool.
Yeah, monsters are cool.
And that's it. They're just cool.
Addams Family, the monster, Herman Munster.
Well, they're comedic, but I mean
comedic, but the
scary monsters.
The
are
Monster
cool.
Mash.
Okay, well, you're getting way off.
Booberry, Count Chocula.
Well, if you look at the etymology of the term monster, right? It's monere or monstrare, right? Monere means to warn. Monstrare means to demonstrate. And so we find monsters as like on the boundaries of things, right? There's always those old maps that you see where there's like Nessie hanging out in the water, and it's like,
oh yeah,
there be monsters. Those are the boundaries. Don't go there. We don't know what's out there. You could die.
Right.
So monsters have, yes, I agree. Monsters are cool. But I also think that they've generationally been around for so long, because if you look at the original tales, the ones that were passed down and recorded then by Grimm, and, we see Little Red Riding Hood, which, there's a lot of symbolism there of like, hey, don't go into the woods. Don't trust, large men or wolves, because they will destroy you. And so the lessons that we're learning from monsters, I think this connects back to what Joe was saying, which is like face your fears. Are we going from here are the boundaries that are of our society, our parameters, don't cross them, to a more exploratory element of like face your fears, see what the boundaries are? Are we changing the narrative that we're telling our kids?
Well, it's reminding me of what someone else has said about why children love dinosaurs so much is because they're a symbol of power. And that's the reason I got into dinosaurs when I was 6 years old. Because it's like, oh my God, monsters actually did exist. Really, I mean, dinosaurs. Jurassic Park is a monster movie. And so for me, yeah, and so yeah, I got into dinosaurs because. Yeah. I mean, for one thing, they're just so scary looking, but at the same time, so powerful. And when you're a child, you feel so vulnerable. You don't have a choice in anything. You're so powerless. And so a monster can be the power. Befriending a dragon is so many kids' dream. Pete's Dragon, How to Train Your Dragon, all of those, befriending a dragon, something like that. Yeah. So you want to feel that. You want to get that power. It symbolizes that for a child.
I think the traditional monsters, say vampires, and when I say traditional, I mean folklorically traditional, shapeshifters and whatnot, they've become these specific characters in like Hotel Transylvania and stuff like that, simply because they're not scary anymore. We don't have fears of these specific things. We now have children of an age that lived already through a pandemic at a young age. They don't fear something like a vampire. The only thing that's perennially frightening that I have found that children will always be scared of is ghosts. They will not be scared of vampires.
Even after Casper.
Casper didn't do anything for the positive press for ghosts. So that's the only thing that's really ongoing as a frightening thing. And I'm saying it from the perspective where we're from, say North America, Western Europe, and whatnot. It could be different in other places around the world, but you'll very rarely find a kid today that's scared of werewolves. Just they'll say, "Oh, they're not real." But if you ask a kid, "What about ghosts?" They're like, "Oof, no, they're not real." But they're probably lying to you. So they probably do have a particular fear of ghosts, and they do often, if they don't fully believe it, they're kind of like, maybe it's kind of a Pascal's wager for them. They're like, maybe I should just believe in this ghost just in case and go sleep with mom and dad. So, yeah. And so I think a lot of that's part of it as well. It's just, we're at the point now where these characters still exist. Like Dracula has seen a massive resurgence in popularity in the last 2 years. I'm a huge comic book reader, and there have been several comic books come out that adapt the novel. Other ones that put Dracula in different stories and things like that. It's been huge resurgence in the character's popularity, and but you won't find people that really are scared of vampires, and we're talking specifically about children. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of the reason as well. They're not. There's nothing really frightening or there's nothing visceral about them anymore for younger generations. They've already experienced too many scary things. Actually,
when I was a child and watching the first Salem's Lot movie, freaked me out. That was scary. There's some really good scary vampire movies that came out in the 80s as well. Mm-hmm. I do remember that. But yeah, but now they've become very, very cuddly. They've become cuddly. You know what? Even Freddy Krueger got cuddly. I mean, Wes Craven's New Nightmare was addressing this, where Freddy Krueger just basically become a cartoon character. Yeah,
that was his going, because he didn't direct all the other ones. He only directed the first one and then New Nightmare. And all the other directors ruined the character. Yeah. So he made the character, and New Nightmare is genuinely scary.
It's a great movie. I think so. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I just think what we've come to perceive culturally as scary has shifted, and I don't think what we're telling our children anymore is shifting. Just maybe we're a little bit more direct about it. So, like. Back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I mean long before our time, hundreds of years ago, parents may have told children to stay away from the well because there's a ghost in the well.
My mom told me to stay away from playing in drainage ditches because there were
Pennywise.
So there was some type of not elves, but some type of monsters in there.
There you go. Right, and in folklore studies, that's called a fict, F-I-C-T, a fict, and that's a story that adults will tell, or an authority figure will tell a child to curb their behavior. But the adult, the authority figure, doesn't believe in it. They either make it up or they know it's not true. But they can frighten the children into behaving a certain way. And we get Santa is a good example of that. And then what you just said, that's a perfect example of a fict. So in the day, way back, that's what people would have told their children. But I think now, people have just become a little bit more literal with their children. They're like, don't go in the well, you're going to fall in, die.
Watch for strangers.
Yeah. And so that could be the shift. Stranger danger, yes, right. So I think that's part of it as well. There's just so much has shifted in society, I think, that, and then everything else follows along. Our culture goes with it, and our culture of monsters follows that as well. So,
I just have to wonder, I wonder if the stories would work better. Like the story your mom told you, Joe, about don't go near the ditches because of monsters. Does that work better than telling them, hey, that's a really dangerous place to play. Don't play there.
She told me a few things. I mean, she also told me, she heard of a kid that got stuck there and drowned.
Probably also a lie.
Yeah, very much. Like Winnie the Pooh got stuck there. But she did that, and I'm such a naive kid, because I think I was as old as 10 and 11 years old, and I was still believing that.
Right. I think they do work better, to answer, in my opinion. I think they do work better. Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
have the imagination. Like if
Right.
like
Oh.
that a monster could get me, something bad could come
I
out
have a
that I didn't
very
know.
active imagination, and so
Me
my little
too.
brother was playing with a boy, some boys, and one was older than me at the dish. And I was telling them to go home. Mother told me to get my brother to go, tell him to go home, and I went out there, and I just, with all the authority, said, "You guys should not be playing there. There are monsters in there, and you could really get hurt."
Joe was 22 years old at the time.
And I was really serious about it. Oh my gosh! I ended up becoming. They ended up becoming my best friends after that. After I made that embarrassing
Dude,
moment.
you
But they never let me.
totally
They
saved us
let,
from the monsters.
they never let me live that one down. That was so funny.
So yeah. What do people do when you tell them to don't go over there? It's dangerous. They go over there,
go over
especially
there, yeah.
kids. Yeah, but if you create a primal fear, which monsters are a primal fear, even though I do think we're, in terms of what we see in movies and stuff, we're moving away from it. But for really young children, if you create these incorporate primal fears, yeah, I do think they generally did work better in the past anyway. I've
It
never
would have been
done
more
anything like
effective if
that.
she just told me there were snakes, which probably there could have been.
Right.
That would have
There
been
you
more
go.
effective for me.
Right. No, I didn't do anything like that with my daughter. We didn't make up any stories. We just told her straight, like, yeah, if you get hit by a car, what do you think is going to happen? So, and yeah, so she learned in a very literal sense, just being told, you will get hurt. You have to go to the hospital, at the very least. But I do think in a broader sense, I don't think my parents told me either any stories like that. Not that I can remember. I probably already believed that places were
But my
haunted anyway on my own. I didn't even have parents to tell
we
me.
always loved my grandfather when he come over, or we go to this place, and he had the most wonderful stories, scary stories that would always spook us out. And then his favorite game to play with us was called Monster, and where he would just hide in a part of the house, and then we know it's like a hide and seek, and then he'd go, we know it's ready when we hear.
When you fall asleep.
Yeah, I know, almost like that. But it was the most scary, fun thing to do was to try to find him. We're scared we're gonna find him. You don't want to find him, but you're scared. It was such a great game.
Yeah, that thrill and the unknown, like the known but unknown. I think that tension there is such a great aspect, and I think it plays back to Shawn what you were talking about with why ghosts are still prevalent. Why, because really death is the one thing that, like, I mean, it's the constant boundary. It's the
Right.
always unknown, and
The
so
undiscovered country. Yeah. Shakespeare reference.
Yeah, I like it. That was very well integrated. But yeah, so I think that plays into that idea that death is still terrifying. That idea of being gone, or your
Right.
parents being gone, maybe for kids especially, is a terrifying thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think even like very early attempts to try to remove beliefs in ghosts. You go right back to Saint Augustine. He very clearly did not believe in ghosts. In letters that he wrote, he says ghosts are not real, and this is a very, very long time ago, and that just didn't work. It's just very important figure within the church, and even the respect everyone had for him, the authority he had, and the historic value he has, just him telling people ghosts aren't real just didn't work, because we had other beliefs that were older than his, older than Christianity, older than all the religions that tell us that maybe they do. So, and that's still with us. So, like the oldest mentioned ghost in literature is written in cuneiform. So, it's Mesopotamian. So that's like 5,000 years ago. It's just part of us, yeah, and we haven't gotten rid of it yet. And it predates the concept of shape-shifting monsters, witches. Yeah, it's much older, and I think it's always going to be there.
Oh. All right, so who's got a scary story? Anybody want to end our end our show with a scary tale to tell?
You got one, Joe?
Shawn, you want me to do the one I end the tour with?
You like Karen heard it because I do it on my tour as well.
Oh, you do it as well? Okay.
Yeah, but I do it. We share it differently.
But it's a good Korean story, you know.
Yeah,
Trying to
yeah,
think of
do
a
that
good
one.
Korean.
Then I can share something. Yeah, you go ahead, and then I'll
right.
share something from my interviews, research, and things that I've done.
All right. One summer, a group of university students went mountain hiking. Halfway up the mountain, they came across this enclosed shelter. Now sometimes shaman, in Korea they're called mudang, would build these shelters on the sides of mountains. And this one girl goes, I'm really tired. I can't make it to the top. How about I just stay here? The rest of you go up to the top, and when you come down, get me, and I'll come down with you. And her friends say, okay, that sounds fair enough. And her boyfriend says, are you sure you're going to be okay? I can stay here with you. She says, no, don't worry about me. Go with everyone else. So they leave her behind. After a while, one of those famous summer rainstorms starts. So she goes inside the shelter and closes the door. 6 o'clock comes around. Her friends haven't returned. 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock. Sun starts going down. 9 o'clock. Boom, 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 boom. There's a bang on the door. She opens it, and her friends come in out of the rain. As she's closing the door, she realizes her boyfriend's not with them. She goes, guys, where's my boyfriend? And her friends say, we're really sorry. We're almost to the top of the mountain when the rainstorm started. Suddenly there was a landslide. He fell off the mountain and was killed. We need to stay here until the sun comes up so we can go to the police and get them to retrieve his body. Well, naturally, the girl broke down in tears. And while her friends were consoling her, tap, 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 tap. She looks up. The boyfriend's face is in the window. And the boyfriend is beckoning to her. Now, in Korea, it's believed that if a ghost is beckoning to you and you follow, you will instantly die. Well, the girl, she gets up, she starts walking towards the door. And her friends go, what are you doing? Are you crazy? You know what's going to happen. She says, I don't care. I love him so much. I have to say goodbye. So she goes, reaches for the door, opens it. Hand grabs her, pulls her outside. Suddenly she's running down the mountain with the boyfriend's hand gripped tightly around her wrist. They're almost to the bottom of the mountain when she trips over this root and falls down. The boyfriend goes to pick her up and she slaps his hand out of the way. Stay away from me. What's going on? The boyfriend says, we were almost to the top of the mountain where the rainstorm started. Suddenly there was a landslide. All of our friends were killed. I'm the only survivor. Oh, dude, I get chills every time I tell that one. Dude.
I love that story. I was hoping you would tell that story because I love that story. We walked away from that one and Andrew was like, oh, the friends are all dead. And I was like, but what if the boyfriend's actually dead?
Oh, no, a lot of people still wonder who's the really dead in that story.
That's the point of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I love that story. That's a great story.
Gosh, I love the story.
Okay, and then I can finish this quick. So yeah, I do as a researcher, I conduct a lot of interviews, and I ask people. I actually have a series of interviews coming up, coincidentally on Halloween Day. That's pure coincidence. Or is it? I interview a lot of people about alleged ghost beliefs. I get a lot of folk tales and stuff from people as well, and I'm currently writing a book, putting all these together, the idea of ghost beliefs and ghost lore and things like that in modern Korea. And one of the most startling stories I collected a couple of years ago was from a man who was a young boy in the early 1970s, and he lived in Jeonju, which is a city kind of in the central west part of South Korea, and that's where my wife is from as well. And there's a lot of water in that area, a lot of mountains, so a lot of rivers. And the rivers in the 70s were very popular for swimming. And the man that I interviewed told me that when he was a boy, he was about 8 years old in the early 70s, and he and his friends would go swimming every day in the summer. That was just the thing that they loved to do. And this one day, they were all swimming together, and he happened to be the best swimmer. And he was very proud when he told me this. He said, I was the best swimmer among my friends. And there was one part of the river where they had never gone. It was very deep. It was the deepest part of the river. And they all said, we've been swimming here for however long, months and months and months. And we love this place, but we've never been out into the deep part. And we're always afraid. And so they all said to the guy who ended up telling me the interview, he said, why don't you go? You're the best swimmer. Let's see if you can go out there, and we'll cheer you on. And they weren't being vindictive. They weren't trying to, trick him or anything like that. They generally wanted to see if he could make it out to the deep part and then make his way back in. So he said, okay, I can do it. And so he started swimming out to the deep part of the river, and his friends were cheering for him. And he got to the spot where was a large pool, and he couldn't touch bottom. And he turned around, he was treading water and looking back at his friends, and while treading, also trying to kind of, pump his fists in the air. It's like, I did it. He's very proud of himself. And all of his friends were, pumping their fists, and they're like, they're very happy that he did it. And then he suddenly felt something scratch his left leg, rub against right around his ankle, he said, right down the calf towards his ankle. And then he felt it on the other leg. Then he felt something grab his left leg. Now, initially he thought he had maybe hooked into a rope or something like that, but he said he felt as if fingers were wrapping around his ankle, and then finally the thumb wrapped around the back of his leg, as if a hand. Then it tugged him. He felt the same thing on his right leg, and it felt like two hands, one on each leg, pulling him backwards, not pulling him under, but pulling him backwards. And he tried to swim away. And the way he was flailing, he figured out later, his friends took that as him celebrating. They still thought he was celebrating that he had made it to the deep part of the river. And so after being pulled back for a short time, then it started pulling him under. And he felt the hands kind of going up his legs, pulling him under. And he kept kicking and kicking, trying to get away. Finally, he did. He was able to kick himself away from being pulled under the water, and he made his way back to the shore, swam as fast as he could. When he got there, he was crying, and his friends then realized something was wrong. One of the friends ran off and got an adult, one of the parents, and they came and they saw what had happened. The boy wasn't talking. He was just crying. They went and got his parents and wouldn't talk to his parents. He was mute for 3 days after that experience. And when he finally was able to speak, he told everyone what had happened. He said he had felt someone grab him. And no one believed him. There's like, oh no, you mistook it for something else. It was probably a rope. And he said, no, it was moving up and down my leg, just like I can feel anyone moving their hand around my legs. It felt like human hands. And no one believed him. The only person that eventually believed him was his grandmother. And she said that there have been many cases in the last several decades of people committing suicide in that river. And so she told everyone, she told all the adults at that time to believe him. She said, stop telling him he's wrong. Stop telling him he's made a mistake. He experienced something. We should be listening to him. And she said, I believe he was attacked by a ghost. Probably the ghost of someone who died in that river. And when his grandmother finally convinced everyone to either believe him or just be quiet about their disbelief, he finally got better. And he said he never had therapy or anything like that. He said it's just early 1970s in Korea. There was no such thing. And but he carried it with him his whole life. And he's still terrified to swim today.
Wow, I think I love both these stories. I love yours because of the idea of belief and the importance of believing in
Yeah.
These stories in our children and what they experience.
Yep. And his grandmother. Yeah. So he said he loves his grandmother more than anyone in his whole family because of that. Or he did. She passed away long ago. But
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Makes sense. So, for Zen Kimchi, for what you do as a whole, for what you two do individually, what is the real importance of telling these stories, keeping cultures present through food, through legends and folklore, you know, through these adventures into the mountain? Because Zen Kimchi kind of does it all at this point.
Right.
What are the
right.
main points of experience?
I mean, everything we do is about promoting Korean culture. And I think Shawn would be the first to tell you, but no, I'm going to be the first to tell you this time. But that a lot of culture is dying. A lot of people, it's being pushed aside because I think people take things for granted. When you're immersed in a culture, you don't see. Sometimes you miss what is valuable about that culture. But a lot of people that are from the outside and going inside, they see, oh wow, this is beautiful. This should be cherished. This should stay alive. And so a lot of what we do is to keep alive a lot of parts of the culture that we feel are great gems that are possibly endangered. Would you say that's true, Shawn? Our podcast definitely does that.
yeah. I think the tour does as well. And our tours definitely do that. No, that's definitely a big part of it. I think there's a perception. One reason a lot of folk traditions start to disappear is because importance or the concept of what is important changes as well. So traditions can change organically. There are far fewer traditions alive today than what have existed throughout human history. Most human traditions have disappeared, but they've disappeared. Many of them have disappeared organically. If a culture decides that they don't want to do something anymore, it's completely fine for them to be rid of it. And in heritage studies, that when you're focusing on heritage, you never focus on the giving generation, you focus on the receiving generation, because it's that end that makes the decision. Are we going to pass this on as well? So if it's starting to disappear organically, that's fine. But there is also an aspect of traditions that can continue without belief. So, I was raised Roman Catholic, but I'm not Christian. I don't have any belief anymore. But I still celebrate Christmas with my family, and it's cultural. There's also secular value in Christmas that people can take, the idea of peace and whatnot. Very, very important things.
And passing on your family traditions as well.
That's right. Familial heritage and things like that. So, and you don't have to believe in things in order for them to continue. And that's mostly what I'm doing, because I know that what I've encountered in my research is that people are rejecting a lot of the traditions today because they're seeing them as archaic. And the beliefs may be archaic. The idea that, okay, you have to feed the ghosts on this certain day because that's when the moon is in the right position, and things like that for harvest.
You have to eat nuts on a certain day.
Right,
we
things
talk
like
about
that.
There's a Korean holiday to do that.
Right. And so the beliefs themselves, anything that's related to ghosts and whatnot, you don't have to believe in the ghosts to follow the traditions. And we do that in our house. So every year we do different traditions, like Karen, you're on my tour, and I talked about hanging the sieve on the JoongAng Daily, the first full moon.
The rice cleaner thingy.
The sieve, yeah.
Okay.
So the che, they say in Korean. And it's either on the Lunar New Year's Eve or on the first full moon of the New Year. It actually shifts. On the tour, I don't say both of those things because it's too much information to give people on a tour. I just say...
And JoongAng Daily is the holiday where you eat nuts.
That's right. Yeah. So it's the first full moon of the Lunar New Year. And so it depends on which region you're in. Either one of those days, you hang the sieve on your door to keep this ghost away from your house. We still do that at our place. We do that here. And we don't do that out of any type of literal belief. It's just the fun following of customs, because there's a beautiful aspect to them that can continue without the beliefs attached.
And we would make sure
that's
we had
my
some,
point of it.
We had some nuts with the breakfast that morning because it's supposed to keep all your teeth if you eat nuts on that day.
Yeah, and your jaw's strong. Yeah.
Well, I just had a nightmare about losing all my teeth last night, so now I have to go.
All right, nuts. It's nuts. You're in Germany. Lots of nutcrackers. You can deal with that.
Especially ginkgo. Ginkgo nuts are a big one in the past. Yeah, eating ginkgo nuts. So if there's any ginkgo around where you live, start collecting some.
Yeah, go find some in Germany. Just go out in the hills.
On the hill somewhere.
Well, I just wanted to thank both of you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I could keep talking forever, but I will let you go on with your evenings.
I have a tour. Yes.
You have a tour. I have to cook dinner.
So I just want to thank you all for listening. Please go and listen to their podcast if you want to hear more about this, because I am going to, because I want to hear more. And just remember that all the world's a stage, so you too can be a shrew. Thank you all.
Thank you.